Well, hello. We're back for part three. By that I mean part two. Part two of The Way of the Blade. I am so genuinely enthused about this episode. I've brought out some of my knives. Seriously, I have knives scattered in most of this country's state lands, mostly under tree trunks, because that's a good place to put a knife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As previously, with the earlier Way of the Blade videos, I tend to rabbit trail as we go along. Don't expect this to be your proper coursework on knives. This is just going to be everything I can possibly teach you about knives in a YouTube video to the best of my ability as quickly and efficiently as possible. But today it's all about fixed blade knives. And I'm starting out holding one of my favorite knives of all time. If you're looking at this knife and you try to find this knife, it's not going to look like this knife. Because I also do everything to my knives to make them a little bit more like me, unique and expressive of what I want them to do and not what I don't want them to do. But today we're going to be talking about different kinds of steels, because that's important, sharpening a little bit, just a little touch on sharpening. But mostly we're just going to talk about fixed blade knives, their uses, their styles, why they have different shapes, kitchen knives even, a little bit. We're going to probably cut up some things, like sugarcane that I found growing in the yard, green limbs, definitely dry wood. I may or may not teach you a little bit about knife safety. I probably should do a little crash course on knife safety. Real quick, I have a whole lot of knives that I'm about to show you. Not all of it, probably in the safest manner that you should use a knife. But basic fundamentals on knife safety. Don't point this part, especially pointy part, into said people unless you really intend to. Really, the cutting edge should generally stay away from your body, especially away from, important areas of your body like veins, tendons, wrists, inner thighs, areas where massive quantities of blood flow. Think of these areas. It's really important you not use a knife improperly. And it's more important, though, that you just not have a dull knife. Because remember, a sharp knife is an effective tool, but a dull knife is a dangerous knife. And it shouldn't even be in your pants or your pocket. Get rid of it by sharpening it better. That's all. You don't ever get rid of a knife unless you need to ditch a knife. And then we'll talk about acids that eat knives away in case you need to get rid of a knife. But that'll be later videos. Expect me to try to not wander down into those rabbit trails too much. But fixed blade knives have one primary difference, like I've said previously, to a folding knife. Folding knife folds in half, meaning the knife is predominantly in two major pieces. Opens, closes. Blade goes hidden away into its own little special hidey hole. Doesn't ever hide, ever, because it's wonderful, and it shouldn't hide, unless it goes into a holster. So every one of these fixed blade knives pretty much has a holster or some kind of area of safe keeping that it needs to be tucked away in. So that way it's not cutting anything you don't want it to cut. Because knives should only cut the things you want them to cut, when you want them to cut them, in the way that they were intended to do the cutting with. So, my favorite kind of things that I think we need to, before anything else gets going in here, is just to tell you what this knife is. Because, honestly, I know not all of you are probably going to stay with me for the next 4.5 hours of knife talk time, but I'm going to. And you should, because it'll change your life. Because, seriously, every one of you needs to carry a knife about your person, mostly legally-ish, to the best of your ability, all the time. Fixed blade knives are the best thing ever. This is a K-Bar BK14 Escobar. I don't know why they named it that, except that they combined the Asiazula and a K-Bar. Great knife. Reasonably priced, like 40 bucks. It won't look like this when you look for it, because I sand and grind my knives away to no end. Seriously, it's fun. Get a little sander. I had Dremels. I've used literally hand tools. I've used all kinds of stuff because it's fun to just grind things away on your knife. But that way I can hold it exactly where I want to hold it, which is with my thumb flush against it. But this is my favorite little knife. Fantastic knife. If you know me, you know it's basically always on my belt. It's one of my favorite tools, and if I only had to pick one, you never want to just have to pick one. But if you had to pick one, for me, this has been my most versatile used knife. I'm not a big, giant knife fan. Obviously, there's caveats to everything I'm saying when it comes to that. But when I'm really practically going about my business, and in most areas, a knife under 3.5 inches is legal to conceal and carry about your person because it's just a tool. Remember, a knife is a tool. It's not a weapon unless you intend it to be one. But you shouldn't ever really intend to be one. But the fixed blade knife has wonderful features that make it the most important tool in your playbook besides your flashlight because it will never collapse on you. Those folding knives do that, and it's horrific. But this one won't, and I love that. And because of that, I can do all kinds of super hard tasks that I normally can't do with anything else. Specifically, cutting things. When you need to cut something, it's really important that you have a very sharp edge that is pointed in the direction you're ready to cut with. Said stick. This is green wood. Green wood means I just cut this off a tree, and it's still somewhat living and soft and pliable. Ooh, that's not as pliable as I was hoping. It's kind of wintertime. Not really the illustration. But fixed blade knives, when I want to cut something like feather sticks, right, where you cut in really fine areas and do all this stuff. I'm just going to shave this into some kind of spear shape and make you think about why I'm making a mess in my RV that I'm going to have to clean up later to prove a point that my knife's somewhat sharp and I can not break it by using it. Seriously. Knives are wonderful. I just want to go through real quick a few of my favorite knives, and then I will dive into their shapes, their designs, and why it's so important to have a knife that's shaped the right way to do the cutting that you need it to do. Second favorite knife that I've generally carried all the time, forever, since the beginning of the day I got it, this one. This is called a DPX Hest 2. Hest 2. So will look nothing like this when you look for it on Amazon or Etsy or wherever you want to find a buy knife, Blade HQ, who knows? There's varieties. This was a knife that came with like all kinds of like a mini pry bar on its tail hook. And you know what that did? Shred my clothing. Seriously, it destroyed so many of my shirts because it was a sharp pry bar on the back of a knife. Because I don't lift up sewer lids anymore for a living to crawl inside there to access Ethernet cables and such. I got over that stuff when I was like in my teens and 20s, 18s. I stopped in my teens. But then, you know, it's one of these things where this knife has all these like kind of other tool features that they incorporate into it. Like you can turn a wrench, screw bit or something with a sharp knife in your hand. I don't know. They put all these other things on knives lately because they think it's kind of like this guy. This is a Candor, which is, or Conku. This is definitely like one of those like cheaper Chinese reproduction knives of somebody else's probably better quality, much more well labored for and loved knife, but it's a really cheap, reasonable, and one of my favorite small carry knives. But same thing, it's got all these other like holes into it for you to, once again, try to unscrew something or open something. This has a bottle opener, which is moderately useful. But these other holes and stuff, I'm not a big fan of any of that stuff in my knife. I generally just want the knife to do what it was made to do, which is to cut something exactly the way it's supposed to cut something when I need it to cut something, and only that something. So, these knives with all these other whatchamacallits inside it, not a big fan. That being said, this is a caveat. This is probably my favorite little neck knife. Knives come in all different sizes and shapes. I have knives that are all the way down to super tiny, like super tiny, thin, discreet, single blade. This is a Bastinelli Pica. Picour, maybe. Picour. This is a really fun little knife. This is more like one of those like tooth pickers, you know? Sometimes you get some stuff under your fingernails and you just like to play with knives and hold knives all the time and just, it feels great in the hand. These little knives have rings on them, and I'm a big fan of rings. You would be a big fan of rings too if you've ever dropped a knife at a misopportune time and it cost you your life. Then you'd just be dead. And that's worthless at this point in time because we wouldn't have this conversation. So carry a ring knife if you really need to hold on to it and never let go. It's almost impossible to disarm somebody or take someone else's knife away when it's in their finger joints. Seriously. I can't personally testify to whether or not that's definitely seriously important. Don't drop your blades. But these little knives serve different kinds of purposes. Super discreet, slim, and I like to, you know, play with the knife. Use it appropriately. But it's fun to hold on to. Other knives that I have also have ring knives, like this one. This is a karambit. We talked a little bit about karambits yesterday, but karambits serve a totally different type of use. They're perfect for cutting open coffee packets. I do have coffee packets. This is really, really good at cutting coffee packets and other things. Like, I'll save that for another video. But this is a Bastinelli pica. This one's the pica. This is the pica. I have a cheat sheet. It comes with a free scoop of ice cream. And there's 3 things written on it. Because these are the only knives I can't remember. This is like a $125 knife. It's a lot of money. I don't know that it was the most wise decision in my life at the time when I paid for this Tiger Claw. Because I soon found a $20 version of it on Amazon. Which is, I have to admit, basically about as good. I love your knives, Bastinelli. If ever you see this, forgive me. But most people just are never going to spend $125 on a knife. And I know, it's okay. But it's far superior quality. And it's wonderful to hold and hang on to. Tiger Claw style or reverse grip. That's when it's scary. Totally different kind of scary. The kind of scary that you should probably just run as fast as you've ever run in your life away from a guy who carries these. Otherwise, I have holsters for my knives, like I said before, that I make. This one, I've made 2 separate holsters for because I like to carry it in 2 separate places. Making your own holsters gives you options, and options are important when it comes to knives because knives, just like all of our life, should come with options, and they really do. But only if you're willing to do the extra work, like learn how to sharpen your knife or learn how to make holsters. So it's really important that you also seriously consider learning how to make a holster. It will allow you to make it just like you, however you are. Different body shapes, different hand sizes. That knife, this one, I carry on my appendix region. I also can mount this to a different kind of tool that I carry sometimes. On occasion, I've been known to do once or twice back in the day or time. But that one sits in a position that I can grab it just like this. Whereas this one sits in a holster round my neck bits. And I don't carry knives on my neck like you'll see some guys talking about knives on their neck like this. I've never carried a knife willingly or voluntarily in this position. Yeah. Then my knife's just dangling and we stand up. It's all bumping into stuff and everybody hears it clunking into the table in the dining room table and everybody knows, dude, you got a knife on your neck. But not so much. Real quick. CRKT. Minimalist. Fantastic knife. This is probably one of the, staples in our home. It's got a little buoy-shaped blade. That just means this blade comes up in a curving manner like that, and you see this kind of drop point, a little bit like that. They call it a buoy-like knife. And it just has these 3 little fingers holds that actually are fantastic. I have moderately medium-sized hands, which is right in between medium and small, and it's a difficult place for knife size. So because of that, oh, I'm losing it. They're all just turning into knives suddenly. I have a different version of it that I just ground all of those finger holes on, because then I can fit the whole knife exactly in my hand. I feel like that's how I cheat the system every time I customize a knife. Seriously, my hands don't look like general random generic shaped finger holes. Seriously, I don't have a 1-inch finger ring. Who has a 1-inch finger ring? I've met some of you guys. Yikes, man. Your fingers are just massive, but mine are not. So because of that, I carry holsters in places that are convenient for me, in shapes and orientations that work for me. So real quick, I'm going to show you one of my trademark secrets that I've definitely never voluntarily showed publicly. But this has been my configuration for discreet carry of knives for about as long as I figured it out and saw this is great. Obviously, I don't wear this on the outside of my clothing, but I generally wear it underneath, and that's a good place to put it. But this puts a knife to where it's not so jangly McJangly, especially if it's under an undershirt, which is a good place to put it under. A shirt. Just think about it. It's hidden and discreet like a backup knife should be, and it's tucked away till you exactly need it. This was my favorite neck knife, though, because I didn't always have a knife I could carry a belt on and all the rest of those other things. So sometimes you just want a knife that's always there just in case you need it, tucked up exactly where you want it to be, and it's not moving around. This was my favorite one for that, for all those years, because cutting coffee was... But when you make your own holsters and you have fixed blade knives, you can put them exactly where you want to, shape, and then deploy it immediately. I know there's guys who have like switchblades, microtechs, said microtech people out there. Shout out, you're fantastic individuals. I love your blades. The thing that it does more than anything else in the world is it's immediately deployed, not ployed. Do you hear that? Wonderful. Wait a minute, let me do it again. That's about all the sound the knife makes. Another reason why knives are amazing. I don't have to reload them, and they're so much quieter. I don't always want to make a lot of noise when I'm cutting fruit, but when I do, this sound, not so noticeable. Whereas this sound, very noticeable, very noticeable. And I'm all about not being noticed until you really want to be noticed, remember? That's the whole principle of like the gray man, the gray woman. I know, there's a lot of hype out there about that, but that's a whole other philosophy video. We'll get there. But knives that are exactly where you want them to be, when you want them to be, is a wonderful thing. And I don't think there's anything in the world that works so well as a fixed blade knife, especially when it's on a neck piece. All I did for this one is I made sure that I had mounting holes on all sides of the knife so that I could put a piece of paracord that I strip all the inner parts of. I just completely rip them right out of it. And then I pull them through the other side like that. And then I cut the end off and I fray it a little bit and then I melt it. And so it sticks right there. And then it doesn't pull off. Unless, if I pull hard enough, it'll definitely pull off. But it generally will not pull off unless I'm exactly ready to yank it off my neck. That being said, fantastic. One of the best ways if you want to carry a neck knife. I highly recommend this. Ditch the 2-string method and get complicated with 4. It'll change your life, and it gives you a reason to carry about some cordage on your person that normally you wouldn't carry. That will definitely benefit you. But like I said earlier, knives come in all different shapes and sizes, and especially with fixed blade knives. Fixed blade knives are really, really beautiful because they show you exactly what you need to learn about a knife just by looking at it. This knife I designed just by kind of cutting it out and grinding away with a belt grinder and sander and plasma cutter, and I had a day in Canada to make a knife. It was amazing. It almost broke my hand. Seriously. It's a lot of work to make a knife. Unbelievable amount of work. Once you make a knife once, you're going to realize how valuable to have a knife for $20 or $50 or even $100 or $200. That's nothing. It takes so much work to actually make a knife. And make a knife that's in a shape and a design that works for you and your hand is special. And this was my first time I ever got to do that. But doing that taught me so much about actually learning why the shape of the knife means everything. So for different knives, they have shapes like something people are a little more familiar with, this fixed blade kitchen knife. This is a chef's knife. This is like a Henkel's chef's knife. My go-to tool for most daily tasks when it comes to my kitchen time. Seriously, I sold fruit at from a farmer's market like a boss with this knife. And I cut oranges in front of people with reaching fingers all day long. And I never made a mistake once, because you can only make that mistake once. And then you're never welcome back to the farmer's markets over their fingers. But because of it, this knife has this wonderful shaped curve, beautiful little curve like that. So I can do a lot of little rocking motions, right? But if you notice, my fingers are all out of the way. Ooh, that was almost a mistake. There's a lot of knives on this table, and some of them don't have sheaths. Kitchen knives generally don't come with sheaths, right? They come with like a wooden block of some sort. But my home is a giant rectangle. It's hard to make wooden blocks in rectangles. Figure that one out. But like I said before, the handle allows me to completely bring the blade down all the way. Oh, that's just a satisfying feeling, isn't it? Anybody who's chopped vegetables knows what I'm talking about. But some knives, like this one, see how short and shallow those grooves are for the handle? When you go to cut down, you just crush your knuckles. Terrible design. I know it serves a different purpose, folks. I just never use this knife because I'm uncomfortable using the knife. And if you're uncomfortable using the knife, you're just not going to use it properly, safely, or effectively. And then you may as well literally never pick it up, because a dangerous knife is a dull knife. And a dull knife is going to be there if you don't want to use it. And it just sits in a drawer and gets kicked around and chipped and broken and just ruins your sorrows. Just fills you with sorrows. Don't avoid that. That being said, this one, if you notice, I also designed so I could do a little chopsies. And the other thing I always recommend on all my knives to the fullest of my ability is this right here. Finger guards. What happened? Well, it might just jump back in. Maybe somebody can give me a shout
I think
out.
it just jumped back in.
Well, if I may have just been talking for about 25 minutes to nobody, and that's totally fine. I'm just going to press on because finger guards are super important. And I'm just going to launch back in. You need your fingers every single day, continually, right where you found them, right where they were made to be. So, knives, fixed blade knives, I highly recommend knives that have a nice, good, deep finger guard groove here. Really, really important that your fingers, when you're using it, once again, to push and cut with, or to poke really hard, that your hand not slip up onto that edge ever. Not one mistake on that. Seriously, you have all these wonderfully important things right in here that when that slips up on that, oh my gosh, catastrophic injuries follow. Seriously, then you don't have your hands anymore. And you need your hands. You must have your hands to use your tools, like your flashlight and your knife. All my knives, with a few tiny little exceptions, have finger guards. You see that? Oh, it's like you really need a finger guard. Finger guards, both directions. That's a real guard. Both directions, you see, because it's called a reverse. You could go both directions. Anyways, Spyderco reverse, discontinued knife. I'm sorry. You should have paid attention earlier when Spyderco came out with the reverse, because back muscles are far more powerful than kitty claws. When you figure that out, email me, and you can go to level 3. All knives have a finger guard to protect your fingers from making terrible mistakes and ruining your day. That's why don't ever buy knives without finger guards unless you seriously know what you're doing. I mean it. One mistake, one time, completely ends your knife career with your dominant hand. And that's important career. Needless to say, trying to ever button your clothing. Try to run a zipper without your main dominant thumb and finger. Bad idea, bro. But those guards, they scale up in size. For instance, this is my Cold Steel Gurkha Kukri Plus. The plus is because most kukris out there, which is just this general basic pattern of a knife blade, have no finger guard. And that's just because maybe people have incredible hand discipline when they're using these. I don't have that good of hand discipline when I'm using a machete. My hands are hot and tired and sweaty, and I definitely slip all over the place when you're chopping into stuff that's so much heavier than you can possibly imagine. Like bamboo. Dang, that stuff's tough. You guys are amazing that made that. Seriously. I love bamboo forests, but they're vicious to cut through. This blade, like we talked about earlier, has different shapes and sizes and curves. This one they call a recurve. Recurves are pretty much one of the most fantastic blade shapes ever made. See how it kind of swoops like an S shape? It curves in this way, curves out that way, curves in this way. This delegates a lot of cutting power towards the front end, so it's a chopping blade. It's literally this just wants to fall out of my hand or chop into the tree. But it's really good for cutting into fruit or fleshy materials. It's just the best shape for that ever. Go look up Makairas. You want to look up some fantastic swords or Philops. Go look up the Iberian sword, the best one ever. I'm fond of it. I'm a fan of it. Look into it. Recurve blades are amazing, but I always think you should have a finger guard, no matter what. If you don't have one, and you're trying to use your knife seriously hard, it is liable that you're going to make that one mistake. So don't do it. Don't be the guy that does it. That being said, find a way to make your finger guard because you need to baby guard your fingers once again. Different blades, different shapes, different purposes. It's a fantastic day. Fixed blade knives are the most wonderful thing that was ever put into my hand, and I'm so thankful that I found them. But they have some drawbacks, and I gotta be frank with you. The main one is concealability. They have some limitations in that they're not easy to hide away, because when you pull out a pocket knife that folds in half, most people are pretty cool with that. You still have some people out there that have knife fright. That's the people that when you pull out a knife to open a package in public or in front of other people, and they go, that kind of shock factor, it's real. We got to address that. Some people are genuinely disconcerted at knives. We have a society that's changed rapidly in about, well, really rapidly in about a week. But it's changed a lot in the last few decades, where it was definitely normal order for human civilizations to carry a knife about their person, even this big, all the time. That was normal. And sadly, it's just less, it's more frowned upon these days. So, because of that, it's important to address people's knife fear. Fixed blades knives, they're definitely up there for people. It makes people a little more nervous when you pull out a fixed blade knife to cut open a box versus pulling out a small folding knife to cut a box. One way you can accommodate that fear is to powder coat your blades, make them black. If your knife can be black, it should be black, because black is always better. Don't draw as much attention to your knife edge unless you really need to draw attention to your knife edge. But they coat blades like this, cold steel, Shanghai Shadow, really budget blade, but it's really good for chopping into machete. And the other thing I brought tonight, because I need a little snack, sugar cane. Sugar cane grows in literally the ground. It's wonderful. Tastes nothing like garbage white refined sugar that you've been drinking, called high fructose corn syrup and all the other weird commodity imitations that they come out. But I really liked this because it was fantastic for me to shave this with. See, y'all thought I was going to chop it. But what I learned over the time is that it's kind of hard to do if you just push like this all the time. You know, you can always push your way through it, and then you're kind of like, I could do it that way. But I really learned to prefer to actually hold a knife still in a fixed position like that and actually pull the material towards myself. It was a little easier that way for me. I always like it that way. When I use wood or my wife does bushcrafting and like we cut into different materials, I tend to hold a fixed blade in my hand in a locked position and pull the material towards me when I can. It's a lot easier for me, a little more controllable of a position. But I like that I can just chop my way directly through it. Oh, it's immensely tempting. And then you can eat sugar cane. Oof. It's definitely getting a little old. It's been in my fridge for a little while, I have to admit. I hope that would taste a lot better at this point. It's kind of turning into rum, and not the good kind, like the run and gun kind that led people to just commit wholesale mass murder. You know, pirates. Pirates. I digress. This is a double-edged knife. This is one of the few double-edged knives that I have, because double-edged knives are serious tools, and you should not use them lightly. And I mean that with all sincerity. They cut both ways. And if you put your thumb on the back of that, it is going to literally ruin your day. And it may ruin your life. Because buttons are an everyday occurrence for some of us. But zippers are pretty much an always everyday occurrence. Uh-oh. She agrees. I hope you can't hear that. My child is waking. Double-edged knives, really important. That you not get a double-edged knife till you're ready to use a double-edged knife. Seriously, don't do it. I know they look so cool, but you're probably not ready for one. Seriously. Don't do double edges until you're ready to deal with double edges. You make that mistake one time mistake, it's game over, bro. You'll never hold the knife the same way. So, because of that, I always held double-edged knives a little more like yonder, this way, away from that. That was just due pre-course in some of the gutter fighting styles that I was trained in. We'll get into gutter fighting another time. FS and Fairbairn Sykes and all these other guys, they have crazy wild styles when it comes to precision with blades. We'll get there though. I digress. I just want to make sure everybody gets as much knife material of understanding it as quickly as possible. But because of that, I'm going to rabbit trail with frequency because I'm also staring at a table full of knives. And every one of them to me has a story and a purpose that is really important and you should learn it. But I'll try to get there. One of the other things that knives with finger guards give you is options, like that configuration. Do you see that? Super important. This way and this way. It stays in my hand all the way. I can actually let go of my knife and it stays in my hand if you build it right. So, build your knives right. The other thing we needed to talk about tonight was steels. Steels are super important when you get into knife fights. I mean, just going down the street and cutting branches and stuff. Steels are important. because they make all the difference in the world when it comes to the quality and the ability for your knife to maintain its edge. First of all, edge holding, its ability to keep its sharp edge, the ease of sharpening, and its resistance to rust and, I guess, just general disease for a knife, kind of. Like, they do decay. They literally break down in front of your face, and it's a horribly sad thing to watch. I have a spear under my rig that's definitely given way to rust in a seriously bad way. I threw it into a lot of places over the years, and it's just rusting beyond belief. And it's literally decaying the integrity of the knife. That's devastating. I should have maintained that tool better. I was using grapeseed oil to coat it with, and then I learned that that's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. It's what I had available at the time. But knives come with all kinds of different hardness. They use different alloys, meaning different kinds of iron and steel, like additives like carbon and molybdenum and nitrogen and vanadium and all these kind of exotic metals they'll put into the steel and lock it into these different crystalline structures to try to add to one of those different categories. Because some guys, you live in super humid, wet climates where it cannot, every knife is going to rust unless it's got a lot of materials that are in it that help it resist that rusting. But once you start adding too many of those materials, it makes your knife so hard it's no longer really usable. This is kind of like on your upper high ends of different knives out there. Like Spyderco has a series called the H1 series, or their salt knives, which you can just sit inside the ocean forever, more or less, and it will endure. But they also are extremely hard to sharpen, almost always. The higher the corrosion resistance goes, the harder and the more, or almost brittle, the edge gets. But an edge that's too soft, like said Shanghai Shadow, this is a cold steel, like China knife. It's definitely not the highest quality of steel or tempering. Tempering is where they take that same steel and then heat it and lock in the structure of it in a sense to maintain itself to the highest potential ability. Good tempering can make up for poor quality knife. Like, this is probably a lot of old cars and, you know, all the recycling you paid somebody else to go pick up at your trash door every day. They just turned around and sold it right back to you. Brilliant. But the lower quality knives that are out there that are generally the more budget blades are almost always, you know, a little bit like 1095 carbon steel. It tends to be the standard workhorse in most budget blades. Good steel, nothing wrong with it. Fantastic. You can count your life on it, steel. But it's not going to hold up to the same type of ongoing, perpetual cutting tasks and keeping that super sharp edge as something called a super steel. Yes, they're literally steels called super steels because just call it super and people will probably buy more of it. It's just good marketing. But there are also just newer and more advanced steels that people are experimenting with and trying to find out new recipes. Like, this is called a Nylox steel, and this comes out of Italy. And honestly, or Lion Steel is one of the manufacturers of it. But it is an incredibly hard steel. And they're starting to do a lot of what's called crucible powder metallurgy, where they're literally melting metal down to an atomic level or spraying it through an atomizer. Like this, sorry, I've got to show this blade all the time. But it's called a CPM S30V. That's the steel name. I don't know if you can see that, but sure hope so. But a CPM is crucible powder metallurgy, and they literally atomize the steel and then compress it into a more secure crystalline structure. That's one way to make a really powerful steel that holds up to edge resistance, edge holding, and, you know, corrosion, and is still easy, relatively easy to sharpen. In my opinion, S30V is pretty much my favorite steel for all pocket knives that I personally carry. And it's just an all-around workhorse. This steel, outrageously hard to sharpen. Like, this edge that I put on there, some of you guys that understand edges, it's almost a convex edge. And that's not because I meant to. That's just because it was so hard to even out the grind on the edge that I ended up taking it down into that shape. And that took dozens, actually dozens of hours of hand sharpening on a stone. It takes a long time to sharpen hard knives well. And I mean that. So for beginners, seriously, it's okay. Buy a steel that's a lot cheaper and get comfortable sharpening it, because this will sharpen up probably in about an hour. versus 20 hours, 25 hours of my life to sharpen this one. But I've used this a whole lot more, and it's never failed me, literally, ever, yet, I guess. We'll see. But same with this one. This is the BK14, but this is a D2 tool steel. A tool steel. It's a harder steel. It's definitely harder to sharpen as well, but because of that, it holds that edge a bit longer. And D2 is just a really good steel. You can actually get these Cancus. They say they're D2 tool steel, but honestly, I don't trust that, and I don't actually have a way to test that. Nor do I think anybody that's probably buying the knife realistically going to do it. But better steels, better quality steels definitely make a difference. Cold Steel has a very similar version of this that's closer to like the $20-$30 range. This version with the plus is a higher quality steel, and then they have which is closer to like the $100-$150 range. Then they have another version that's $500, and that's their San Mai edition. It has this layering in the steel where they're folding it over by a Japanese man thousands of times. Not seriously, but that's kind of how they advertise it, and they'll show somebody folding steel with a hammer. Good knife marketing. But San Mai is a way they layer the steel so that it creates different patterns. And honestly, when you layer the steel in certain ways, you can actually almost create a partially serrated edge as it sharpens, which is incredible. But I just, it's hard for me to justify $500 for a blade. I would love $500 blade. I'm not saying I wouldn't ever accept one as a gift. I'm just saying, budget blades, they're far more realistic. My first real machetes and most of my knives that I ever had were cheap steels that I then learned how to sharpen to be very good tools. And then I got up to a place in my life where I tried to invest in a little higher quality ones. Spyderco, in my opinion, sells some of the best in-betweener knives, where you have your much more budget blades in Spyderco, and you have your much more expensive knives. They have some super expensive custom knives. I've been to the factory where they make them, and they're pretty spectacular. They're art pieces, genuinely art pieces at certain points in that layer, but they start to use really exotic steels, and then guys start to actually make their own steels. And that's a whole other world that opens up that I'm just barely teased myself in. I know like Forged in Fire and a lot of these shows made knife making awesome and cool, and you can make it out of ball bearings and all these other things. But really, people have been using bar steel that you just order from a factory and cut into a shape and then grind it out. And that's an awesome thing. That's basically what I did with this one. I just bought the blank knife, no handles, and then I ground it into a shape that I liked so that my thumb could sit right there. Isn't that great? Look at that. It's like it was made for my thumb, because it was. And you can do that. And you shouldn't be scared to modify your knives or amend them. Make them your own, man. It will make you love them. Or miss. I'm not trying to ignore you ladies. Chelsea's going to come on here, by the way, and do a little bit like wife knife. Because it took me 4 years to find a knife my wife would actually carry. And it turned out to be a switchblade. That made my heart happy. But she's going to talk about why. And why every person should carry a switchblade if you can legally carry it, more or less. Because it's just always safer for moms and people when there's children and babies running around and you can just immediately deploy your knife and put it away with one hand. It's harder to do with these folders. But I digress. Knives have those different kinds of steels, and because of that, they're also so much harder to grind at different times. This one took a lot of time to try to grind, just as much. But still, I probably didn't temper it quite right. And so it's easy to sharpen. Uncomfortably easy to sharpen. I think I need to do it again. Send me something if you guys know about that. I gotta retemper this thing and figure out how to make it better. But knives, and they're different steels. Here's another knife. I showed this one the other night. This is NR369, which is kind of like a more stainless steel. There's so many different steels out there, I can't even start to try to identify them all, but I just want to give you guys kind of my favorites. CPM S30V, one of the best steels ever. S30V is also what it's commonly referred to as. One of the other ones, this one. I'm gonna try to read it, but oh yeah, let's see. CTS. No, I can't read it. I tend to grind logos off my knives because don't leave logos on your knives that can be easily read. Just don't. It's not a good idea. and it may cost you your life or prison time. Don't do it. But because of the different steels, you have different pricing options. So a lot of people that are getting into the knife game are suddenly going, oh my gosh, why is this version $180? It's a lot of times the steel. The steel, literally, you can have just that blank of steel cost that much more. Other times it can just be because a guy who handled it has a really good stamp and he puts it on there and he markets himself well as a really custom knife maker. And so he makes more money because of it. There's a wide range of reasons. But that being said, I encourage you to look into fixed blade knives. Find yourselves one that you really enjoy and like. Oh, this is another one. And there's a gentleman out there who designed a lot of my favorite kinds of knives. I've already mentioned him a few times, Bastinelli. He makes great blades. Like the karambit. I have a folding karambit of his that's genuinely almost cut my finger off. It was a great knife. It just makes me nervous now. This is another gentleman out there who designed or helped consult towards knives that made other knives. He goes by Southnark. He's another guy that did the grappling or extreme close quarters combat that I train other people. I know about for some reasons. This knife is also designed in that. Same thing. A reverse edge, meaning the edge is not where it normally is. Edge down there. All right. Wait a minute. Those are... Now they're going the same way, but then they're not. And that's how you cut your hand. This knife is not designed to go like this in my hand. It's really designed to go like this or like this. And that's for other reasons. Back muscles are very powerful. But these are some of my favorite because they came with really nice G10 great grips that I was able to sand and hone to my own fun razor edge. When it comes to knives, we're also going to have to talk about clips and mounting brackets, and I think we'll do that in a different video. But real quick, these are called Pull the Dot. Pull the Dot. Some of the best little attachment brackets ever made. They don't come off your pants even when you're wrestling. And sometimes you're wrestling. Seriously, check out my Nature Nate videos. I didn't wrestle an alligator, full disclosure, but I looked it in the face, in its eyes, and I was ready to wrestle. I carried that knife for me. I was going to wrestle him with this one. Probably not my best choice, but it's what I had, and it's somewhat waterproof-ish, but it still rusted a little bit. But knives should belong in the places that they go. I think each and every one of you needs to take some time, consider seriously getting yourself a good quality, wonderful knife. It will not be a mistake. It will be something that you can depend on the rest of your life. And plus, if you get a good quality knife and you don't lose it because you made yourself a holster with a good clip on it, or you just bought another guy's holster that he made, that he did really well, that's also totally fine. No shame in that. You should probably buy somebody else's, even if you make your own. People do it better a lot of times because they do it for a living. I don't. Except I do. Different kind of living. But because of that, it can change your way of thinking, the way you look at the world, the way you interact with the world, and it gives you opportunities to engage in the world in a way you wouldn't have without having a knife right in your hand when you need it to be there. So, I think that somewhat wraps up what I was trying to tell you guys here. Let me just peruse my table to see if there's anything else. I've got to make a quick note here. Like, people have asked me a lot about throwing knives. Someone gifted me a pair of throwing knives to experiment with. Awesome gift. I've never met anybody, ever personally, who threw a knife voluntarily, effectively, and instantly stopped the fight. I know there's really cool action scenes where they're like, yeah, and they're just throwing knives just with wicked precision, unbelievable precision from across the entire room and hitting people in the throat and immediately ending the fight. I've never met anybody, and I talked to a fair amount of humans about knives, and not one of them's ever done that, apart from in a circus show. And even then, they never hit them in the throat, right? I've never seen it effectively stop a knife immediately, a fight immediately. Not like a gunshot, where you see people just also not stop them really as quickly as you think. But knife throwing, I'm going to experiment with it. I just think a tomahawk is basically for that. Like, throw a rock. People have been throwing rocks a long time. Long time. Way cheaper, far easier to find. Throw a rock. Probably don't throw a knife unless you really want to devote yourself to learning a trade and a skill that is seriously hard to learn. And if it goes wrong, you just gave the guy your knife. Remember rule number 1? Ring knives. Don't give the guy your knife. Don't give somebody else your knife unless you really intend to give them your knife. And the worst way to do that is to just throw it in their face. and then they pick it up and poke you a little bit with it. Don't throw your knives unless you really, really want to be cool and practice diligently for long periods of times, so that you might potentially consider throwing a knife in a one specific kind of scenario where you see it playing out in your life. It's probably not going to happen, man. It's probably not a good idea. Just throw a rock. Remember that. It might just save your life. So, but this holster is good enough for me to just want to definitely try to learn. It's beautiful. Oh, these are Hibben knives, throwing knives. They're said to be perfectly balanced and creating exact rotation every time. I don't know how to create exact rotation every time. I've never been really gifted at those throwing sports. But that being said, don't throw your knives. Keep them where you want them until you want to put them somewhere else, and then make them wonderful for you. This one, the DPX Hest, I ground that one out too. It used to have all these bumps and ridges for multi-tool that was like wire strippers. I've never stripped wires with it but one time, and I didn't strip it correctly because it had three choices, and I chose poorly. And then it used to be a ramp that was right here, and it made my hand feel awkward in a blade. I like it when my hand is comfortable in a blade, and so because of that, I grind most of my knives with that shape into them. If you get a knife of your own, you can grind it how you like it, because I know there's some dudes out there with mad hands, and you need big knives, big hand space, and plenty of real estate to get purchase on the handle. And ladies, you and I think would accommodate knives better, because smaller hands fit better if the knife fits in better. So, find a way to get your hands on a good quality knife that you depend on, but more importantly, learn how to use it properly by sharpening it well and using it every single day. Anyways, tune in tomorrow, because we're probably going to talk folders, and it's going to be fun. That being said, the last thing I wanted to say you should also maybe consider carrying is a Band-Aid. I mean it. It's definitely going to happen. You're going to get cut. If you want to carry a blade, you're going to get cut. Absolutely, categorically, guaranteed, no matter what. It's going to happen sooner or later. And this really can save your whole finger from one bad mistake. This turns of one bad mistake, like, little confession time. This knife. I only cut myself one time with this knife on accident while I was trying to pull the whole belt off of my pants quickly, because if you need to use a knife or defend yourself from another knife, use your shoes. Think about it. Or your belt. Think about it. But when you try to pull your pants off in a hurry and you're just pulling it off like that, this clip is so good, it just wouldn't come off. And so because of that, the knife actually got bound up and pulled out of its holster, and it definitely cut me pretty good right on my thumbsies here. Didn't cut through the tendon space, but I immediately put colloidal silver and raw honey on it. Raw honey is way better than garbage Neosporin. Stop putting Neosporin on everything. It's poison, basically, kind of, for the most part, if you know what I'm saying. Raw honey was made to give you healing. Seriously, look into it. Spend some time. But a little Band-Aid can stop a really bad little cut from turning into a catastrophically infected nightmare and gangrenous, and you lose your thumb. And you only got two, bros. Keep them in check. Keep them in place. Practice basic first aid. It might save your life, or just a really important digit and infection from turning into you died because you cut your hand and didn't carry a Band-Aid or raw honey. So carry raw honey too. Anyways, I hope you guys had a wonderful night. I know I did. I appreciate you. Have a fantastic evening. I'm going to probably still continue to eat this sugar cane, even though it's going to give me sour belly. It'll be a wild ride. Enjoy yourselves. Catch you on the other side.